Hello, everybody. Mr. Viteri here once again, and let's get right to it. So, we are in Unit 8, Day 4, and we're going to continue our conversation in regards to pollutants and how we, as humans, affect our environment. I believe we left off with dissolved oxygen and temperature, and how high temperatures are going to actually decrease dissolved oxygen. And so, during the summertime, particularly in New Jersey, we have issues. So, the water warms up, less DO, fish die offs or fish kills are more prevalent. Let's change gears a little bit off of that and now talk about some new stuff. So, I want you to know how construction affects our waterways, even if it's a house that's not next to water. Um, when the construction basically is done, you're going to dig up some of the ground because the foundation of your house is going to lay into the ground. Now, when you dig that dirt up, and typically Jersey's full of clay, that red clay that we talked about during our soil chapter. When it rains, it's going to get caught up in the runoff, and then it's going to float down the street and go into the storm drains. Now, some of these storm drains are going to go not to the wastewater treatment plant, but instead they'll go right into our river, or they'll go, and from our river they go into our ocean, the Atlantic, or the Raritan Bay, out into the Atlantic Ocean. So, what happens when this clay gets mixed up in the water? The water becomes, it's not clear anymore, and instead it becomes what we call turbid, or it increases in turbidity. And when more sediment is in water, fish can't see each other, predators can't catch their prey. Photosynthesis is decreased because now light cannot penetrate through the bottom. The water looks cloudy, murky. All right, so we could even say ecotourism is going to be an issue because no one wants to go into water that you can't see the bottom. You want to be able to see through the water. Okay, so just understand those are examples of how construction can affect the waterway. I've seen this a couple times too. Typically, during in a waterway, there are trees that overlap, and I'm trying to envision Merrill Park. Hopefully, you've been to Merrill Park before. And those trees that overlap the little stream, the fish like to stay in the shade of those trees. If you remove those trees next to a body of water, that's going to increase the temperature of that water. And so when we increase the temperature of that water, once again, we're going back to that topic of thermal pollution, which is going to be increasing the temperature of the water, and then we're going to decrease a dissolved oxygen. All right. So that is the correlation between temperature and dissolved oxygen. I don't think I went over this slide. I know I'm going all over the place. I apologize if you're going to get lost, but all these things are interrelated. So we're still talking about water. We talked about turbidity. Now we're on thermal pollution. We're talking about how trees removal can increase the temperature of water. But what other types of thermal pollution? Now, thermal pollution is going to be like heat pollution, typically involved with water. Now, at a nuclear power plant, at a coal burning power plant, at a natural gas burning power plant, since you're burning a fuel, or in the case of nuclear, you have very radioactive hot things, you want to keep your system cool, meaning it's not going to melt, meaning it's not going to smelt, meaning it's not going to burn down. So, how do you keep your engines from your generators, your motors from getting fried? Okay. Yes, you use lubricants, and that's why lubricants are so important. We'll come back to that later. But you also want, if you had a car, there's a radiator and there's cooling, there's antifreeze. Or in a case like a big nuclear power plant facility or a coal burning power plant, you could use water to try to bathe around your machines like a radiator so they can keep cool. Now, if the power plant facility is sucking up, let's say, colder water from the environment, then it is trying to keep the machines cool. It's going to start to warm up that water. Then the discharge of that water is going to now, so it takes in cold water and now it's kicking out hot water. That localized area is going to increase in temperature. And since it increases in temperature, it's going to cause a drop in dissolved oxygen. So just understand, next to these type of facilities, there's going to be an issue regarding dissolved oxygen. This could cause a fish kill. I think I mentioned in one of my past lectures that during, particularly right now, in the colder time, the water's still cold. It's May in New Jersey, of course, and I do fish next to one of these places. I fish for recreational purposes. I don't necessarily keep the fish. I'll let them go, but they're sitting in there because they actually like the little bit of warmer water when the surrounding area is very, very cold. So, um, anyhow, increased temperatures decrease the dissolved oxygen. Typically, it's a bad thing, and it could also speed up the metabolism of fish. So that means that they're breathing even more, and therefore they're going to be sucking out that dissolved oxygen even faster. All right. Okay, so we touched upon turbidity. We touched upon dissolved oxygen in relationship with temperature. And let's look at this objective from the CED. When elemental sources of mercury enter aquatic environments, bacteria in the water convert it to highly toxic methylmercury. What that means is that if I spilt mercury on my hand, it's not going to just like penetrate through my hand and then go into my body and be uptaken. Um, Mercury has to transform into a usable form before it gets uptaken by biological organisms. Who does that? Bacteria. So, if you recall Minamata, Japan, this was I believe, pesticide company. You can Google that. It's either a pesticide or a fertilizer company. It was based in Japan, and one of their discharges, their discharge right into a river, and in that river, they discharged mercury. The mercury was converted into methyl mercury. It then was uptaken by microbes and then larger fish, and then whoever ate the fish, it was going to affect them. And so this is a classic example of we can't be releasing heavy metals, specifically mercury. We're going to go over three particularly, and don't think that it's just so many different ones. There's about three or four that are on the CED that you need to know. Mercury is one, and since this is something, methyl mercury. Mercury gets converted into methyl mercury. Get it into the head, write an index card. Who does it? Bacteria do it. It then gets uptaken by microbes and then bioaccumulates in the microbe. Then the fish that eat them, it bioaccumulates, but as it goes from one trophic level to the next, that's biomagnification. And so the larger species, the one that's doing the consuming, since it eats multiple smaller species, that toxin builds up. Okay. And so understand that we're trying to touch upon those topics of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Be able to discuss those, be able to differentiate between those two. Okay. And so now at the top of the food chain, that toxin typically is very, very high. Okay. That's probably why it's not, that's why they tell you don't eat very large fish. Very large fish have, in order to get that large, they've been eating a lot of small fish. Even if the small fish have small amounts of toxins, if you're a large fish, let's say like an orca or something like that, throughout your whole life, you live a long time, not just like, a year. You live maybe 30, 50 years in the wild. You're going to accumulate many of those toxins throughout your lifetime. Okay. And those can cause, in terms of mercury, it is a neurotoxin, developmental delays, learning disabilities, loss of control of the body. Think of everything that the brain controls when you're trying to think of these type of things. All right. Let's continue. So here's a really cool picture. Okay, so let's just say mercury was released into the environment. The bacteria are going to convert that into methyl mercury. It then's going to go into the plants or the algae. The smaller fish are going to eat these. The bigger fish are going to eat these. The duck are going to eat these. The otter is going to eat these. The bird is going to start eating the smaller fish, and we could also start eating these fish, and that mercury can get into us. Yeah. So that's why you probably see a lot of signs, particularly, we're close to New York City. The Hudson River is the river that separates us from New Jersey from New York City. And so you have to go through the Holland Tunnel or the Lincoln Tunnel to get over to New York City. So that waterway right there, back in the day, there was a lot of things that were dumped right into that Hudson. It has now been embedded in the sediment in there. They've tried to clean it out, and it has been getting cleaner. But there are fish advisories, crabbing advisories, not to eat the fish that are there. Why? Because what we're talking about right now. Some of the things could have been paint that have mercury inside of them that now was converted into methyl mercury and now has gone up to the food chain. So particularly crabs that stay into the sediment, they're absorbing a lot of those toxins. So you want to know where your fish are coming from. Okay. And so typically that's probably not a good place to have fish. All right. Let's continue. So remember how I was talking about Minamata, Japan? I think this picture says a bazillion words. This is an example of developmental delays. Unfortunately, this child does not have control of their nervous system. Notice that the twist in the arm or the not ability to basically control the head movement here is indicative of what we call Minamata disease. All right. And so that was a classic case study that occurred from a factory releasing mercury into the water once again. Okay. What was it? Mercury converted into methyl mercury. Who does that? Bacteria. And then it goes up the food chain, bioaccumulates in one organism, biomagnifies throughout the food chains. And then ultimately that top consumer is going to have detrimental effects. Right. So let's put it all together. Right. Mercury is a POP. What is a POP? It's a persistent organic pollutant. Well, what does that mean? Just in its name, when it says persistent, it means that it's going to last a very long time. It's not going to break down. Okay. Let me try to give you an analogy. And it might be a little disgusting, but maybe you'll remember it. If your dog poops outside, now some of you don't have dogs, so I don't know how this is going to work. Let's say a dog poops outside. How long is that poop going to stay there? Well, if the sun is cooking it and then it rains and then a rabbit eats it, it probably stay there a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on the size of it. It's probably gone. Okay, it has broken down. All right, it is biodegradable. Now imagine if you took, let's say, a steel ball. It's a small steel ball, even a golf ball, and you put it outside. How long is it going to stay? That golf ball is going to stay there, get beat by the sun. It's going to rain on it. It's going to basically stay there. It could stay there for years. I think I found buried golf balls that might have been there for decades. Okay. You could think of a POP as something that is stable like that. Doesn't matter if the sun's hit. Doesn't matter if the rain is beating on it. It's going to be stable in its environment. And so that's why it's very, very dangerous. And so typically in the past, and currently, we have made these chemicals. And two famous ones, which are on the CED. So remember, mercury is one that transforms into methyl mercury. These are the other ones. So DDT, which we spoke in length from. Remember Rachel Carson and the Silent Spring and the eggs, the eggs of the birds that were basically shallow. And then when the mommy bird sat on it, it basically crumbled. And then there's a new one that we're going to introduce today is PCBs, okay, which stands for polychlorinated biphenyls. They're no longer used in the United States, but guess what? Since they are POP, they're still here, and they still can be detected in species like seals and like polar bears. What? How can they get detected in seals and polar bears when the polar bears are all the way up north? We're going to learn more about that a little bit, okay? But just understand that these toxins can travel long distances via wind or water or air or sea. But here's another picture. And would you tell me if this is bioaccumulation or biomagnification? Well, this is biomagnification because we're going up throughout the trophic system here. And so notice, since this human probably ate many bass, that it has accumulated a lot of that toxin. Okay. Now, as we spray fields with pesticides and then things like cows eat that pesticide and now or eat the grass that has that pesticide, it could also accumulate in milks. if it is a POP. Okay, so these are certain studies. I mean, that's why there's a push towards organic milk. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to tell you do the best you can. But just make sure that you're getting your milk from a reliable source, and we'll continue on that. So just understand that toxins can build up into humans. And you know what? You know why it's hard to get rid of these toxins? Because they're fat soluble. All right. And so I skipped over this one. Persistent organic pollutants can be toxic organisms because they are soluble in fat. And I have these Chichos that have been with me for quite some time now with this dad bod that I'm rocking. And it just stays there, just like a Chicho. and if you think of it that way, you can think of it that since it gets stored in the tissue, the fat tissue, okay, the love handles, it's going to stay there a relatively long time. And so it is getting stored in the fat of these organisms. Therefore, it stays there a relatively long time. Let's continue. All right. A review of those two important POPs. I know, we talked about mercury as well, but DDT, 1962, Rachel Carson wrote The Silent Spring. What happened? Well, we were spraying everything. We were spraying waterways. We were spraying trees. We were spraying kids. We were spraying babies. We were spraying everybody. We sprayed and dusted it on our troops. This was everywhere. Okay. And then our springs started getting quieter. And we were like, well, what's going on? Well, there were no birds. What happened to the birds? Well, the shells of the birds were getting soft. When mama bird would sit on an egg, the eggs would crack. Here's what happened. All right. And that's right off the CED. So make sure you understand that one of the effects of DDT was that basically the shells of eggs were very, very soft. And when mama bird sat on them, they basically crumbled and died. This decreased their numbers. Okay. So DDT was a pesticide. It worked really effective. However, it did hurt other organisms higher in the food chain. DDT, even though it is banned, is still detected in organisms all the way up into the North Pole. So how did it get into the ocean? We got another slide for that. Okay. PCBs, this was a chemical largely used in lubricants. And imagine a lubricant that does not break down. That's good because a lubricant is usually used where there's high friction in a motor, and so it gets very, very hot. Electricity gets very, very hot. The wires get hot as as electricity is pulsating through it. And so our transformers, if you don't know what a transformer is, it's those sticks that are outside that has the electrical wires on it and those metal things. Those metal things were filled with PCBs. After those sometimes explode, the PCBs get released and it falls down like oil, it rains, it goes into the waterways, and it is still present today. They are POPs. We're going to throw in their endocrine disruptors, but atrazine would be our number one endocrine disruptor if we need an example of that. Okay, and being an endocrine disruptor, it is going to cause developmental delays. What does a PCB stand for? Polychlorinated biphenyls. All right, and they will basically affect, since they're endocrine disruptors, they'll affect your pituitary glands, they'll affect your glands, your development. They could cause birth defects, and they also cause cancer. All right, let's continue. Now, remember how I was saying they can travel through sea and air and they're very far distances? Well, look, if that toxin comes into the water, it then gets into the sediment, algae basically pick it up, phytoplankton here, and then zooplankton, then the inverts, then the fish. Look how it's accumulated. Now, once it's in a seagull, the seagull can go anywhere. It's going to fly north, south, wherever it's nice. And then we also have marine mammals like seals. And then it even goes further. We have polar bears and orcas, which the concentration is even higher. All right. And so these toxins, as POPs, can travel very far distances. All right. Once again, we'll remind you that they are fat soluble, aka Chicho soluble. All right. They can have a reproductive, nervous, and circulatory systems. They can affect those things. It's important to know those laundry list of things. Okay. And once again, DDT. We're almost at the end here. Remember this: DDT, mercury, turns into methylmercury by bacteria. Then it gets uptaken by organisms. And PCPs all bioaccumulate and then biomagnify and cause damage to ecosystems. Okay. All right. I think we're done for today. You were an excellent class. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture, and I'll talk to you real soon.